Good evening, everyone. Thanks a lot for coming. I'm Steve Bloomfield, Associate Director of the WATSAN Institute. And I like to tell a story before each of these sessions that many months ago, in the warmer months of June and July, together with a few people, I thought it would be a good idea to have a series about the election season that was unfolding and forthcoming. I had a thought, along with the person with whom I spoke most closely, Ted Widmer, who has taught in the history department at Brown, that we were coming into somewhat dangerous times, and we wanted to be prepared with opportunities to speak and to listen to Brown faculty about the elections and the season that we were witnessing. We didn't expect, to be honest, that the result was going to be as it has been. But we did expect that there would be things to talk about before, during, and after, and I'm particularly glad that we had assessed the idea that there would be opportunities to talk about what has happened. And then finally, I thought that the last in this series of discussions, which have numbered 7, it would be good to talk about the legacy of President Obama, whether the Democrats won or the Republicans won. So this series began in the middle of September, and it's ending now, just with the right person, I feel, Glenn Loury, who's going to be talking about the legacy of the president. I thought I'd introduce the idea first by quoting from an article that I think many of you have read. It was by David Remnick in The New Yorker. It was the November 28th issue, and he just laid out things that have been accomplished or not in the Obama administration, some of which I'm sure Glenn will be speaking about. So David Remnick wrote, "As recently as early 2015, the Obama administration had been in a funk. He had underestimated ISIS, Putin had annexed Crimea, Syria was a catastrophe. His relations with the Republicans in Congress, especially since the crushing 2014 midterms, were at an impasse. Then, in a single week in June 2015, the Supreme Court ended years of legal assaults on Obamacare. The court ruled in favor of marriage equality, and at a funeral following the murder of 9 congregants at a black church in Charleston, Obama gave a speech that captivated much of the country. Rather than focus on the race war that the killer had hoped to incite, he spoke of the reservoir of goodness in the living and the dead, and ended by singing, as I'm sure you all remember, Amazing Grace." Remnick continues, "A sense of energy and accomplishment filtered back into the administration. Long before Election Day, books were being published about its legacy. An economy steered clear of a beckoning depression, the rescue of the automobile industry, Wall Street reform, the banning of torture, the passage of Obamacare, marriage equality, and the Lilly Ledbetter Fair Pay Act, the end of the war in Iraq, heavy investment in renewable energy, the appointment of Sonia Sotomayor and Elena Kagan to the Supreme Court, the killing of Osama bin Laden, the Iran nuclear deal, the opening of Cuba, the Paris Agreement on climate change, two terms long on dignity and short on scandal," Remnick writes. Obama's approval ratings reached a new high. Clinton's election as the first female president would complete the narrative, and Obama, his aides suggested, would be free to sit in the healing sun of Oahu and contemplate nothing more rigorous than the unrushed composition of a high-priced memoir. That has not come to pass. So here we sit with a new administration in transition, and by the way, we're going to have a conversation about this transition coming up on Friday afternoon at 12, I believe, in this very room. But before we talk about transitions, we'll talk about the legacy. And let me tell you something about the man who is here to speak to us tonight. Glenn Loury is a faculty fellow of the WATSAN Institute, professor of economics, and Merton P. Stoltz Professor of the Social Sciences at Brown. He's published principally in the areas of applied microeconomic theory, game theory, industrial organization, natural resource economics, and the economics of race and inequality. He's a fellow of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences and of the Econometric Society, and a member of the American Philosophical Society. He's won many awards, including the John von Neumann Award of the Budapest University of Economic Science and Public Administration for his profound impact on students, a Guggenheim Fellowship and a Carnegie Scholarship to support his research, the American Book Award, and the Christianity Today Book Award for his book One by One from the Inside Out, Essays and Reviews on Race and Responsibility in America. He's also received much-deserved recognition, seeking that he offer his wisdom in prestigious fora, the Du Bois Lectures in African American Studies at Harvard in 2000, the James A. Moffett 29 Lectures in Ethics at Princeton in 2003, the Tanner Lectures on Human Values at Stanford in 2007. As a prominent social critic and public intellectual, Glenn has published more than 200 essays and reviews in journals of public affairs in the U.S. and abroad. He's a member of the Council on Foreign Relations, a contributing editor at the Boston Review, and was for many years a contributing editor at the New Republic. At Brown, he's taught, among other courses, a graduate course in development studies, an undergraduate international relations class called Ethnicity and Inequality in Global Perspectives, and with WATSAN Institute professor in political science Ashu Varshney, greatly valued Brown International Advanced Research Institute, or BRI, as we call it here, which has been an annual, for the last few years, early summer exploration of issues in global conflict, inequality, and ethnicity. So there's no one better suited from a domestic perspective, from a disciplinary perspective, from a global perspective, to talk about the Obama legacy today. Thanks for being here, Glenn.
Thank you very much, Stephen. Thank you all for coming out. You probably want to hold that applause until after you've heard what I have to say. Thank you all for coming out. It is a Tuesday night, 7 o'clock. I get it. I mean, you should be home with your kids or eating dinner or something. I've been asked, and I'm going to read my remarks for maybe 25 minutes or so, because it is, I want to be clear in expressing myself. It is a difficult question, actually, for me to take up at this point in time. I've been asked to make a few remarks to provoke some discussion about the legacy of our outgoing president, and that's what I intend to do, to provoke you. I'm not a historian, nor am I a political scientist. Others will be better informed than I about the legislative record or the nuances of political change, the backroom dealings, the infighting and maneuvering that has taken place during Obama's time in office. His landmark healthcare legislation hangs by a thread. His effort to promote an international coalition to fight climate change is in jeopardy. His success at leading us out of the quicksand of economic recession and financial collapse is an important achievement, though likely soon to be forgotten, especially if the currently anemic economic growth rates in the economy improve in the near term. His presiding over the killing of Osama bin Laden, that's a plus, I suppose, and nobody can take it away from him, though I must say, his and others' constant bragging about this achievement was a bit unnerving to me. His appointments of Sonia Sotomayor and Elena Kagan to the U.S. Supreme Court will, one hopes, cast a very long shadow. And although his effort to champion equality for women, minorities, and immigrants will no doubt be countered to some extent by the new administration, much of that progress will survive. His presidency has, of course, been historic, merely in virtue of the fact that he demonstrated the possibility of a black man rising to the pinnacle of political achievement in America, sustaining himself as the most powerful person on the planet for nearly a decade. But this remarkable personal achievement and those few legislative enactments notwithstanding, we must ask, what will be the lasting impact of the Obama presidency? That is the question before us. As a black man, I have an additional question to ask. What will his presidency imply for black Americans? In breaking through the color barrier in American politics 8 years ago, did Barack Hussein Obama bring with him a distinctive African-American moral vision? Did he somehow embody an alternative version of American history? Did his blackness matter much Will there be a lasting Obama effect on the African American consciousness? Did he change the game for black and brown politicians in a way that will resonate to the benefit of a Cory Booker or a Deval Patrick? Some thought this would be so at the time of his elevation to the office of the presidency. They anointed the ascendancy of President Obama with world historic significance and linked this to his race. A black man, an African American, a son of Africa, had risen to occupy the highest office in the land. Our time had come, some said. Hallelujah, they shouted. Indeed, I can still to this day recall the soaring close of Reverend Joseph Loury's benediction at Obama's first inauguration in January of 2009. Listen for just a moment, if you will, to the voice of the co-founder of Martin Luther King Jr. Southern Christian Leadership Conference as he opened events on that glorious day of nearly 8 years ago. Listen for its hopeful, prophetic tone. Loury said, "We pray now, O Lord, for your blessing upon thy servant Barack Obama, the 44th President of these United States, his family, and his administration. He has come to this high office at a low moment in our national and indeed the global fiscal climate. But because we know you got the whole world in your hands, we pray for not only our nation, but for the community of nations. Our faith does not shrink, though pressed by the flood of mortal ills." He went on, "For we know that, Lord, you are able and you're willing to work through faithful leadership to restore stability, mend our brokenness, heal our wounds, and deliver us from the exploitation of the poor, of the least of these, and from favoritism toward the rich, the elite of these. We thank you for empowering thy servant, our 44th president, to inspire our nation to believe that, yes, we can work together to achieve a more perfect union. And while we have sown the seeds of greed, the wind of greed and corruption, and even as we reap the whirlwind of social and economic disruption, we seek forgiveness, and we come in a spirit of unity and solidarity to commit our support to our president by our willingness to make sacrifices, to respect your creation, to turn to each other and not on each other. And now, Lord, in the complex arena of human relations, let us help us, I should say, to make choices on the side of love, not hate, on the side of inclusion, not exclusion, tolerance, not intolerance. And as we leave this mountaintop, help us to hold on to the spirit of fellowship and the oneness of our family. Let us take that power back to our homes, our workplaces, our churches, our temples, our mosque, and wherever we seek your will. And I'll close. I'm quoting him at length because I want to capture the spirit of the time, that wonderful day 8 years ago. Bless President Obama, First Lady Michelle. Look over our little angelic Sasha and Malia. We go now to walk together as children, pledging that we won't get weary in the difficult days ahead. We know you will not leave us with your hands of power and your heart of love. Help us then now, Lord, to work for that day when nation shall not lift up sword against nation, when tanks will be beaten into tractors, when every man and every woman shall sit under his or her own vine and fig tree, and none shall be afraid, when justice will roll down like waters and righteousness as a mighty stream. Lord, in the memory of all the saints who from their labors rest, and in the joy of a new beginning, we ask you to help us work for that day when black will not be asked to get in the back, when brown can stick around, when yellow will be mellow, when the red man can get ahead, man, and when white will embrace what is right. That all those who do justice and love mercy, let them say amen. Okay, such was the hope widely embraced by a majority of the American people at that time. This prayer, delivered in the style of a black Baptist preacher, had the new president nodding and tapping his foot. Some of us will recall that. In this prayer, this famed black preacher, longtime ally and Confederate of Martin Luther King Jr., exalted the humble in the official story, America's minorities, black, brown, yellow, and red, and he humbled the exalted. But did Obama do the same? The preacher dared to hope that white will embrace what is right. The Reverend Joseph Loury confirmed for many the glow of a heartfelt blessing on what was expected to be a new era. But sadly, and with the benefit of hindsight, I think it's fair to say that events didn't develop in quite that way. So now I come to ask, how did that work out for us folks, for us black folks, for us Americans? Did we in fact enter a new era? More pointedly, did the election and re-election of Barack Obama constitute a kind of fulfillment of Martin Luther King Jr.'s famous dream? This is precisely the kind of question about American history and the place of the Negro within it that our great historians will be parsing, fighting over, and striving to illuminate for decades to come. The fight for control of this narrative about the lasting significance of the presidency of Barack Hussein Obama will, I'm sure, be a fierce one and will be raging still long after I am gone. I'm afraid that my preliminary answer to this question, for what it's worth, must be a resounding no. Obama's 2 terms in the nation's highest office neither fulfilled King's dream. Racial inequalities are every bit as deeply rooted now as 8 years ago. Race relations are arguably much worse. Nor did President Obama's time in power serve to usher in any sort of new era, the Norwegian Nobel Peace Prize Committee to the contrary notwithstanding. Quite the contrary. Lasting change from his presidency is hard to find. Speaking politically, what future can we envision for the Obama coalition, so-called? Now, where are the Obamacrats? What ultimately will be the political legacy of that campaign of hope and change of 2008? These are fair questions, for the fact is that during the era of Obama, we have witnessed a virtually unprecedented collapse of the electoral fortunes of the Democratic Party at the state and federal levels. Some, especially now after Trump's victory, will attribute this to racism. I, for one, without for a moment denying the reality of racism in American life, think that's way too easy. I'm more inclined to see it as a colossal failure of political leadership. No message that resonated, no next generation bench of political talent being developed, and no success at leveraging the commanding advantages of 2009 on behalf of change that we can believe in, and change that lasts the test of time. Of course, obeisance to the white supremacy is holding us down narrative will prevent acknowledgement of this reality by many who will insist that we depict ourselves, we African Americans, including President Obama, as the victims of birthers, racists, climate deniers, and Republican obstruction. Meanwhile, back in the real world where I prefer to live, we're going to have to deal for at least a generation with the bitter fruit of what looks like an awful lot like President Obama's abject political failure. Failure. Yes, of course, there were racial overtones to the opposition that confronted Obama, but we always knew that this would be a part of the terrain, one of the difficult obstacles to be managed and overcome. I'm simply claiming here that those obstacles were not insurmountable and that a shrewder and wiser and stronger political leader might well have overcome them. Easy for me to say, I know. But President Obama did not overcome these obstacles. Instead, he exacerbated the problem of dealing with America's residual racism from his office by, on occasion, mishandling the responsibilities of his office on race issues. Here's what I'm saying. President Obama faced a critical choice from day one, either to stand above racial identity politics, incurring the wrath of many of the race card players by insisting on being a president who merely happens to be black, or to become the first president in our history to utter such words as, "If I had a son, he'd look like Trayvon." That was a mistake. He injected himself thereby as a partisan into the middle of a racially explosive dispute when he could not possibly have known the facts. President Obama did not choose wisely. He erred further by splitting the difference on questions of law and order when riots broke out. He ought to have expressed with clarity and unambiguous firmness the primacy of the rule of law in Ferguson, Missouri, in Baltimore, Maryland, and elsewhere. Instead, he equivocated. Think what it would have meant to our country, and perhaps even to the outcome of this last election, if our nation's first black president had chosen differently, if, for example, he had not made a man like Al Sharpton into the prominent informal ambassador of his government to people of color. This is just one example of how he simply failed to get the country behind him, and this was not the inevitable consequence of him being black. I dare say the opposition to Bill Clinton during his 8 years in office was no less virulent and intense. But Clinton was infinitely more deft as a political leader than was Obama. Clinton saved his party from irrelevance and oblivion by entering into strategic compromise with his enemies, Newt Gingrich in 1994, for example. Obama has, by contrast, led his party over a cliff. He was dealt a far more favorable political hand in 2008 and 2009 than Clinton had been dealt in 1992, and he nevertheless managed to make less of it. Barack Obama will enter the history books on less than flattering terms, I predict, once the dust has settled and the events of his historic ascendancy to the White House can be viewed with some objectivity. Indeed, I'd bet a fair sum that even today there are veteran Democrats who are quietly lamenting what is, upon reflection, a plausible thesis that their party would have been much better off had Hillary Rodham Clinton been nominated and elected in 2008, with Barack Hussein Obama waiting his turn in the Senate and running for president in the current election cycle. What is more, that additional political experience might well have equipped our nation's first black president to better handle the predictable challenges which, as a black man in the Oval Office, he was certain to face. Okay? Are you feeling provoked yet? Remember, that was my job. So we are left to ponder, how are we going to factor into this historical narrative the reality of the political failure of Barack Obama? Of course, we could deny it, but I don't think we've got the facts on our side if that's the path we choose to take. When the first black president took office, his party was in control of both houses of Congress, most of the governorships, and quite a few of the state legislatures. As he departs, the party has been completely decimated at all levels. There's to be a Republican president who will be working with Republicans in control of both federal branches and 2/3 of the state governorships. Reapportionment lurks right around the corner in a few years, so the effects of this Republican dominance may be long-lasting. Trump will appoint at least 1 and possibly 3 new justices to the United States Supreme Court. Indeed, Obama's humiliation is nearly total. Our departing president, the first son of Africa to occupy that office, went out on a limb during his recent campaign, begging black voters to support his designated candidate based upon the imperative to preserve his legacy. I may not be on the ballot, he said, but my policies are on the ballot and my legacy is on the ballot. In speech after speech on the campaign trail, he allowed us how he would be disappointed with his black supporters if they didn't turn out for Hillary Rodham Clinton. Well, they didn't. They didn't turn out in Philadelphia. They didn't turn out in Detroit. They didn't turn out in Milwaukee, where they needed to turn out in order to make that election go the other way. What are we to make of this? A few tens of thousands of votes here and there, this way or that, could have changed this election. Obama has presided first over the rise of the Tea Party, and now the Trump movement. Yes, it's a movement, and Trump is going to do what President Obama didn't do, but perhaps ought to have done. He's going to go around the country holding rallies after he's seated in office, keeping alive the fervor of his movement. He's going to harness the energy and intensity among his supporters from the campaign. Mark my words. I take no pleasure in saying this. I just prefer to live in the real world. And I certainly don't hold Obama responsible for the shortcomings of the Democratic Party candidate in this last election, but the fact of the matter is that President Obama has left his party in a hole. He's failed. He ran for president promising hope and change and has left us with not much of either. At the end of 8 years, it's bitter ashes. All that he did hangs by a thread. So now our country's first black president, such an elegant man, so sophisticated, so intelligent and articulate, with such swagger, departs from the national political stage looking to all the world like someone who didn't know WTF he was doing as far as leading this country is concerned. The proof of this pudding has got to be in the eating, folks. He's failed. A black man got to the highest office in the land. He penetrated the highest glass ceiling, and then he fell flat on his face. Okay, perhaps that's too harsh, but we are now about to enter the era of Trump. I repeat, I don't blame the president for the fact that Hillary Rodham Clinton lost the race that was eminently winnable, but I must insist that this loss is definitely a part of the president's legacy. Not good.
Thank you. You provoked.
Thank you. That was generous.
All right. Glenn was very generous in speaking pithily and shortly, so we have a good amount of time to have a conversation. These seminars were set up, in fact, for lots of interaction, so question, comment, react. Pat, please. Say who you are, please. Everyone will say who they are. I'm not picking on you.
I'm Brad Rothman with the Center for Prisoner Health and Human Rights here in Providence. And my question goes to the impact of his economic choices from the beginning, and how much do you see those as having had an impact when he started out with Larry Summers, Tim Geithner, Ben Bernanke, when in fact he had promised change. And I think that the saddest part of the legacy is that that was one piece of the longstanding democratic presentation understanding that started under Clinton and policies of triangulation that consistently moved the party to the right, and how important you think that is.
Yeah, I confess to not being an expert in these matters, but I did read the newspaper for 8 years. I remember, I think Bernanke was already in office when the president assumed presidency, but he did appoint Summers as his counselor in the White House, and he did appoint Geithner as the Secretary of Treasury, and Geithner was a protege of Summers at the New York Fed, and Summers was in effect a protege of
Robert Rubin.
Yeah, Rubin, so on. So we have the financial crisis. So a great transfer of wealth takes place. So a political opportunity presents itself to all the metaphors I think of are profane, and I can't say them, but cut off some of their essential organs and put them in a place where they needed to be put. I mean, it's time to go for the killer. It's time to do the thing that you needed to do to cash in on that political opportunity in a way. Nobody went to jail. Not that many people, as far as I know, went bankrupt. I mean, the people who pulled that heist walked. Now, I wasn't in those meetings. I don't know what Larry Summer whispered in the ear of President Obama. I don't know what Timothy Geithner might have said to him. But I do know that Bernie Sanders was still complaining about this 8 years later. I think an opportunity was missed. That's just my opinion.
Tony, did you have a?
I was going to ask more specifically about what your opinion about the nationalization of the banks was, because that was kind of the moment where they had them, and whether that was the moment to squeeze, or whether it was the question of prosecution afterwards. Because prosecution for stupidity or was going to be difficult, and it's remained difficult. But the fact was that they were bankrupt, and the government owned them, and could have done what they wanted to do with them as owners. And
could have zeroed out some of those accounts. This is a little bit inside baseball, and I'm going to pretend not to have. I'm not going to pretend to have expertise that I don't have. I'm not sure about all the details and whatever. I'm just kind of giving a broader political gloss on it. I think a much tougher, a much more actively belligerent facing off with Wall Street was required.
The original political sin, or the original exemplar of not having the political muscle to make the thing through? Because in some ways, it looks like that's the boomerang that's come back at him, from the Tea Party through Trump, the anger that nobody paid for ripping us off. We ate it.
Yeah, well, there's that, and I mean, there's also the way that the Affordable Care Act was enacted into law by, a shoestring with no Republican support. Again, it's going to be said, and it well may be right, he would have loved to have some Republican support, but he couldn't get it. There are people who are on both sides of that question. But I think that, I mean, if you look back to those town halls that the representatives were encountering in 2009 and into 2010, when people were up in arms and against the Tea Party movement was getting started, it seemed to be instigated by. There's a good book out there, Theta Scotch Pole and whatnot. But we're going to have ample opportunity to review these years and to diagnose all of what might have gone wrong, because this guy, I'm talking about Donald J. Trump, is president-elect of the United States, and he's appointing a government right now as we speak. And there's going to be a government that we don't ever see. All these people appointed to regulatory boards and assistant secretary positions and whatnot like that. And we're definitely going to go in a different direction. We have the opportunity to reflect at our leisure on all that may have gone wrong.
Identify yourself, please.
Oh, Stanley Bleeker. Would it be fair to say that he didn't know how to wield power?
Yeah. Let me just say about this conversation that we're having. So I'm the guy that's up here in the front and everybody else is sitting out there. But I don't want it to be asymmetric in that way. My mouth is not a prayer book. I don't have the Rosetta Stone. But yeah, that's what I just said in so many words. So I agree with that. I would like to know what other people think. Yeah, I think that's fair to say.
Go ahead.
So when it comes to power.
And identify yourself, please,
my
too.
name's Joe. I have such a loud voice, honestly.
Please
okay.
use it.
So you were mentioning that Trump is going to continue campaigning and mobilizing people, and
So, yeah.
and when Obama took office, a very mobilized generation because of the war really demobilized. Like that Facebook guy came in and built that huge database and then just shut it down. Was that a fork in the road? Could there have been another wielding of power in a different way?
Sort of feels that way. Again, I'm not the best informed person about the mechanics of political mobilization and exactly what happened to the mailing list and the contributors and so forth and all of that. Certainly feels that way. The air went out of the balloon, didn't it? By the time we get to 2010, there's a tsunami going in the wrong direction. I don't know. The president had a difficult job. I'll be the first person to admit that. It was a difficult job. Did he risk the ire of provoking his political enemies by, as it were, taking victory laps around the country and bringing out huge crowds in Ann Arbor, Michigan, or Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, or whatever, of his constituents? Was he trying to do what I just got through saying that he ought to have done? Choose, not the blue pill, but the red pill, or whatever. Not take the road of, I'm a black man in the Oval Office, but I'm a man in the Oval Office who happens to be black. I hope I'll get pushback about that. I understand that that's controversial. I know that what I've said is very arguable. I had my judgment about it. Maybe he was trying to do the kind of thing that I had in mind when I said that, which is not to too much inject the kind of demographic, trump card, sorry for the pun, that he had. Into the management of his office. Maybe he was trying to be above that. We don't do theater. That's what I've heard one of his aides as having been quoted. He didn't want to play to the crowd. He wanted to be serious about managing the affairs of state and not playing political games and so forth. I don't know. These are things we can speculate about.
Thank you for the talk. My name's Richard Wimberly. And my opinion is the biggest social problem in the United States is the continuing interrelationship along what's known as ethnic racial lines. Both the the feeling that there's still inopportunity for certain large groups of people because of the color of their skin, and also the fact that there is still a discrimination by the establishment against people who have different colored skin. And I think one of the problems is that when in Barack Obama's instances, is that he was willing to use that called race card in order to achieve purposes, but yet not to solve problems, but rather than to gain local ability to overcome in particular instances, whether it was in defense of himself or whether it was some other instance, and wasn't able to really step in to deal with it. And I think there's a continuation here. I'm a person, I'm a member of the general public, but I'm a member of the general public who's been around the world and been in Africa and Asia and Europe and other places. And my opinion is that the continuation of the idea that you're black and I'm white is the stumbling block, because I'm not white, and I prefer to not think of you as black or think of him as black. I would tend to think of you as someone that I would come to listen to, as I have a number of times, because of what you say, and read you because of what you write. And it doesn't, the black and white is the printed page. It's not the color of our skins. And I think the need in America is to break away from black and white and to be Americans, or to be other hyphenated, recognizing other legacy, but not that we're black and white. And I hold the dream of Martin Luther King to be the highest dream that we should have, and yet it happened sort of, and yet it didn't.
Okay, so, Mr. Wimberly, let me give you what I think would be the pushback. This is a man who in 2004 stood up at the Democratic National Convention and gave a famous speech in which he said precisely what you said. He said, it's not a red America or a blue America. It's the United States of America. It's not a white America or a black America. He said, I embody it in my very DNA. A man whose father was an African, whose mother was a white American. He, in a profound way, instantiated the very idea that you have affirmed. And the pushback would be, he was the same man in 2008 when he got elected to the presidency as he was in 2004. His views about that hadn't changed one whit. But what happened was that he encountered a buzzsaw. He encountered a determined opposition, partly mobilized around the idea that a black man was in the White House, an idea that wasn't much spoken on Capitol Hill, but that was widely embraced by many of the constituents of people on Capitol Hill. You'll recall during the State of the Union address early in his first administration, somebody stood up on the floor of the Congress and broke the decorum of that august body by yelling out during the president's speech, "You lie!" Unprecedented, at least in my knowledge about the history of American government. That would not have happened. The pushback would go to a white man. That didn't happen to George W. Bush, who couldn't carry Barack Obama's book bag, they would say. He got more deference and more respect in keeping with the office than this man, who happened to be of African descent, was granted. They will say, and I'll stop, Mitch McConnell announced on day one, I'm not necessarily buying all this argument, I'm just giving you, as forcefully as I can, what I think the argument would be. Mitch McConnell decided on day one that they wanted to make sure that he failed. Not that the country succeeded, but that Barack Obama failed. Probably wouldn't have decided that if he hadn't been a black man, they will say. Okay? There were people who could not accept the idea that it was African Americans in the White House, African Americans hosting state dinners, African Americans representing the country at critical moments, African Americans greeting foreign leaders coming to this country. And that simmering undertow of racial antagonism made it impossible for him to do what we have every reason to believe he believed in, but wasn't even given a chance to do it, they'd say. What do you say to that?
So my first thought is that when we go back to the dream of the Reverend Martin Luther King, he says that we should look at the quality of their character rather than the color of their skin. And I may be in a great minority here, but I don't view Barack Obama in terms of his policies as being necessarily a person who's created great policies. In the introduction, we talk about, there was a talk about how the Supreme Court has ruled that it's legal, the Affordable Care Act. Okay, but is it the right thing to do for medicine? Is it the right thing to do for people? Is it the right way to deliver the goods that was needed at the time? And therefore, when we talk about policy, he didn't deliver policy. And you want to go back and talk about, well, maybe some people say it was about the color of his skin, and maybe it was. I'm not denying it because I know it's deeply rooted in American culture, but it's also the fact that he didn't deliver on a lot of things that he made promises that he would. He would say change in the campaign without defining it, and then he comes into office and we find that change is a new medical system, a new medical insurance system, which takes away from people their ability to make choices that they've made all their life, the ability to choose a doctor. A health relationship is as much a relationship of love between the client and the healer. And in this new system, there's no love. It's all squeezed out by the Affordable Care Act.
Okay, thanks. And I think there are going to be others in the room who will have a different opinion. I'm anxious to hear from them in the fullness of time.
Over there, too. However you want to go.
Ed Steinfeld, WATSAN Institute. Thanks, Glenn. As always, you are incredibly eloquent. But I have to admit, I didn't find what you were saying to be particularly provocative in any way. Maybe because I share some of your anger, but maybe also because I didn't quite understand what exactly the target of your attack, for lack of a better word, is. So if personally speaking, if I look at the Trump victory, I'm angry about it. And yeah, by definition, it's a failure of the previous administration. Again, speaking just for myself, I look at the Hillary Clinton candidacy, the fact that she was the candidate, the anointed successor, makes me angry. And I think she was the wrong candidate for the time, but time that called for change, she wasn't a change candidate. You could blame the administration for that. You could look at the failure or the challenges that advanced industrial democracies are facing across the world right now. The U.S. is just one, but it's the Trump insurgency, the Brexit insurgency, the Italy stuff. It's across the board. And you could say, all right, it's the Obama administration is not causing all that, but it's part and parcel of some kind of phenomenon. And I just said as background, I still don't get exactly what it is that the Obama administration did that's making you angry and that's making me angry. So let me list a couple of categories. One is the guy somehow, he created a self-identity that was just wrong for the time. He campaigned on change, and maybe he presented himself as the first African-American president. Maybe he should have done something different. And I sense there's a piece of that in what you're saying. So something about identity. And then maybe there's something about strategy. The guy campaigned for change, and he at least never was willing to do class politics. He'd do a lot of kind of politics, but never class. And maybe that was, so that's maybe strategy. Then there's maybe, and this came up a little bit, kind of association. Who did he surround himself by? Of course, that's going to relate to class and strategy, but maybe that's where he went wrong. And then there's just another one. Maybe the whole damn system is a mess. And it's a mess in the United States. It's a mess in the UK. It's a mess in Italy. And because it's a mess, a vacuum has been created for insurgencies. I don't think Donald Trump was the chosen candidate of the Republican establishment. I'm sure he wasn't. And Hillary Clinton, she was the candidate of the Democratic establishment. So no establishment candidate won in this election, and no establishment choice was taken in Brexit. So you could say the system is failing. But if it's the system, and Obama's to blame for that, or at least he was a participant in maintaining the system, then what are we really saying? That he should have run his presidency as an insurgent? I mean, I partly believe that, but is that what we would have expected of this guy? That he would have gone out and either done some kind of populist campaign or something in the face of a lot of opposition, we acknowledge that, but to be successful, would Obama have to run an insurgency against the democratic system as it's evolved in the United States? So sorry I went on for so long, but help me understand why you're so angry, and maybe you'll help me understand why I'm so angry.
Yeah, I thought that was pretty good, Ed. You ticked off a number of possibilities there. I'm not sure I have a whole lot to add to it. Why am I angry? Okay, so in addition to the things that you talked about, I'll confess. I supported Hillary Clinton in 2008 during the campaign. Okay, I know I wasn't supposed to. I thought, I'm from Chicago. I know a little bit of something about Chicago politics. I haven't lived there in a while, but I've got children who live in the city, and I know a little bit about what's going on in the city. And I thought, this guy, I mean, he's attractive, he's brilliant, he's got this persona, he's exciting. But I thought, he's a carpetbagger. I'm just confessing, okay? You got to give me a break. It's 2007, 2008. I'm a Chicago homeboy. I'm looking at this guy who flies in from Hawaii, takes over my city, compares himself to Abraham Lincoln, and waltzes into the White House. I thought he was green. I didn't think he had enough experience. I thought he had not done anything except be Barack Obama. Got himself elected to the Senate. Running against Alan Keyes? Anyway, got himself elected to the Senate. Okay? That's not nothing. It's also not exactly a presidential resume. I thought, I'm going to go, this is 2008, this is just Glenn Loury, resentful Chicagoan, carpetbagger comes in and takes over my city. Let me just, stir the pot here a little bit. Yeah, he's black. Chicago boy, okay, South Side. Yeah, he's black, sort of. Now, I know that's a very unkind thing to say. He elected to be black. He cultivated his blackness. I'm told by one of your colleagues who went to high school with Barack Obama that when he was a younger man, he only dated white women. And when it was heard by some of the people back in Honolulu that he had married Michelle Obama, they said, no, not Barry, not Barry. They thought he was Samoan. I'm gossiping now, but and it's 35 years into the president's, 40 years into the president's history, so it's not fair. But let me just say, in that speech in Philadelphia during the campaign after the Jeremiah Wright thing went down, I knew Jeremiah Wright. I mean, I know him, he's still alive. I know Jeremiah Wright. He's a fiery preacher, goddamn America. You know, you remember that. Everybody remembers that. Jeremiah Wright is a good man. Jeremiah Wright built that church, Trinity United Church of Christ, from a 50 or 60 member congregation into a 5,000 member force of nature in that community. My dear cousin, who died tragically in a boating accident at the age of 50, was buried in Jeremiah Wright's church. I know Jeremiah Wright. Jeremiah Wright is there on the south side of Chicago. He's there cheek by jowl with Louis Farrakhan. Yes, Louis Farrakhan. Louis Farrakhan. Louis Farrakhan has thousands of followers on the south side of Chicago. Nobody ministers on the south side of Chicago in the African American community who doesn't respect Louis Farrakhan. They don't have to agree with him. They don't have to affirm everything he says, but he's a part of the fabric of that community. I watched that campaign unfold I watched the firestorm around around Jeremiah Wright's remarks when it was. I watched national reporters go to a church. I went to high school a half mile from that church. Go to that church with microphones and then report out to the public the storyline that they wanted to hear because they were all in the tank for Barack Obama. And suddenly, my black Chicago disappeared. It became a caricature. It became something to be ashamed of. It became something that the president, soon to be president, had to apologize for. I resented that. When he said about Jeremiah Wright, who had taken the side of the Palestinians in some public discussion over and against the Israeli Zionist, whatever. This is Jeremiah Wright. And when Barack Obama said, in effect, I can't quote him in that Philadelphia speech, the man is confused. That infuriated me. Jeremiah Wright was not confused. I thought the weight of the African American spiritual and prophetic witness in this country over 200 years coming now to a head with respect to world affairs because one of our number was about to perhaps assume the highest office in the land. I thought it had been traded on an auction block. I didn't like it. I didn't like it at all. So that's just me. That's Glenn Loury. I'm just fessing up. You ask me why am I angry? Well, one of the reasons that I'm angry is for the things that I've been describing here. But I would hope that that would not color my judgment about where we stand now after 8 years of Barack Obama's presidency. And I don't think we, if I can use the first person plural in speaking here, are in a very good place. And that's what I was trying to say. So maybe I'm mad for the wrong reasons. Maybe your analysis is correct. There really isn't anything to blame Obama for here. And you heard me try to give voice to this idea that he did face this kind of implacable force of racial antagonism. But my own feelings are complicated.
Let me just, for the next question, ask you something, Glenn, about something you paused at with some moral gravity, I thought, with regard to the killing of Osama bin Laden. There was something there that you wanted to say, I think, that maybe you didn't explicate fully, that might have had to do with the moral and political moment there. What resonates in my memory is much more Hillary Clinton giving claim to that constantly during the campaign. But I guess Barack Obama did too. There's something about that gives you unease, and it does me too. But what is it? Can you identify that?
Yeah, and I'm not sure that I should have any privileged thing here. This is just one man's opinion. Yeah, it did really disturb me. And yeah, you're right. Hillary Clinton kept bragging about the fact that she was in the room, she was in the Situation Room. And it wasn't so much the president himself waving the flag, I killed him, but it was other people saying, amongst the accomplishments, and I think David Remnick said so, that they had extirpated the life of this master terrorist. This is not President Obama's fault that our political culture has gotten to a point where, and Trump is like this thing taken to an extreme power, where we pat ourselves on the back and brag about killing people, about taking people out, about good guys and bad guys. Now, I'm not a Pollyanna. I understand that war is hell and that it has to be fought. That defending yourself against people who intend to harm you sometimes requires that you do harm to them first. I understand that, but you don't have to brag about it. You don't have to thump your chest about it. So this idea that this is an iconic moment in the Obama presidency, this photograph that we've all seen of them in the Situation Room watching the screen like in a movie somewhere where they're getting real-time video about what had happened, it rubs me the wrong way. Now I'm going to stop short of, I don't know if everybody knows who Cornel West is. Cornel West is a prominent African-American intellectual and social critic. And he had been a supporter of the president early on, but he turned against the president. And one of the reasons he turned against him is because nobody on Wall Street went to jail. And another reason that he turned against him is because of drone strike war, which is the way that the war on terror is being fought under Obama. And a lot of people are being killed. Some of them need perhaps to be dealt with. Others of them happen to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. And I'm not going all the way to the point of kind of lecturing the president about how to be commander-in-chief. I got no idea what intelligence he might be getting and what the options are. He needs to do, presumably, what he and his military advisors determine to be necessary in order to defend the country. But you don't have to crow about it.
Hi, my name's Ken. I'm a PhD student in political science. So I want to sort of confront something that's sort of a more current reality, but that also is something that you touched on, which is that, you know, beyond sort of the murky questions of race and things that Obama was always sort of destined to confront, no matter how the rest of his presidency went. You know, this is something that we're facing right now, which is, you know, Obama may have done a poor job in the driver's seat, especially in those early few years, but just what about the question that just Democrats just suck at playing hardball? And that pains me to say as one of them, but it's something I think that we're seeing come into the foray again, which is that, you know, Mitch McConnell, day one, our number one priority is that, you know, this is to make this man a one-term president, right? Democratic leadership, we'll work with Donald Trump where we can find commonality. No, but here's the problem. I was appalled when the Republicans did that 8 years ago, but now they've done something that's hard to come back from, which is they've broken the system. One of my favorite thoughts that I saw in the wake of the election was basically that the Republicans broke Washington, and then they had Democrats write the check to cover the damage. And I think that's an apt description. But so here's my question now. It's easy enough to say Obama didn't do a great job in leadership. It's easy enough to say that, you know, top down the Democratic Party was just toppled basically over the last 8 years, losing so many governorships and state houses. It's easy enough to say that. Now the question is, what in the hell do you do to try to reverse that course? Especially because, to me, the response that the Republicans had, which was, we're going to do nothing, we're going to sort of forcibly break the system in order to get power back, really kind of isn't an option anymore, you know, for the sake of the country. So what do you do? How do you play hardball now that the shoe is on the other foot?
It's a good question. I'd be interested to hear what people have to say about that. I don't know exactly. I mean, I did read in the newspaper, if it was today or yesterday, that there are some Republicans talking about slow-walking Trump appointments, cabinet and other, and, you know, not rushing to get a lot of approval, you know, so I think attorney generals and such generally get approved right away, but, you know, you can slow-walk it because any senator has a prerogative, and you can, you know, you can get 30 hours of debate or something like that, and you can sort of clog the system a little bit that way. I heard some people talking like that. But then I also heard people saying there are going to be 18 Republican senators up for election in 2018, 10 of them in states that Trump carried in this last election. And some of those people, I can name some of them, Joe Manchin. I wouldn't be surprised if you find an R next to his name before we get to the election day 2018. I'm talking about the West Virginia senator, the one who shot a bullet through a, what did he do? He demonstrated that he liked guns by having himself in a campaign ad filmed firing a weapon into a, I hope it wasn't a Bible, but it might. Anyway, I'm being funny. I shouldn't be funny about something serious like this. I think people, Democratic congressional leaders, have got to be careful. You can say, they did it to Obama, we're going to do it to Trump. But if that means that nothing gets done for another 2 years or whatever, you're setting yourself up for a situation where people can say, look, we had, you know, these are obstructionists, they're kind of whatever, but you give us the, you know, the clout that we need in these chambers, and we'll get them straightened out. You know, I don't think maneuvering, parliamentary maneuvering, while it may be necessary in some circumstances, is a substitute for political mobilization, for having a message, for reaching people. Again, I feel a little funny up here being the person doing this talking because I'm not really an expert, but it seems to me that Trump was right about some stuff. in terms of reading the electorate and identifying what people really cared about and moving them. I mean, I couldn't help it. I'd watch these rallies. I'd log on to the Trump thing at YouTube and watch these rallies in fascination. Tens of thousands of people crowded into these arenas, thousands and thousands more lined up to get outside. The fervor, right? And I watch Hillary Rodham Clinton have to bring, Beyonce and Jay-Z and whatnot in order to get people to turn out. Where was the passion, I thought? So, I'm just rambling up here right now. What do we Democrats, yes. What do we Democrats do right now? I think we need a sober period of reflection, and I hope that we will dwell in the real world. I mean, I got one of my friends, I love this guy, he's a brilliant guy. I don't want to name him, but, he's hoping for unfaithful electors. Faithless electors, if we could just get 40 people to change their vote. No, actually, I think you need more than 40. No, 40 would do it. I think 38 would do it. If you could just get 38 electors who are pledged to Trump out of a matter of conscience to change their vote. And then I saw one of these electors from Texas, actually, writing in the New York Times this morning or yesterday to very much to that effect. But people are living it. I think are living in a dream world. You really think you're going to overturn this election? So stages of grief, we'll get past that and then we'll get serious about how to connect with people and how to get back in the game. And, I didn't read the end of my speech because I wanted to leave enough time, but at the end of it, I said about Obama's legacy, I called to your attention the fact that President Obama has said, in effect, give Trump a chance. That's what he said. He said, we want him to succeed for the sake of the country. He's more magnanimous than those a-hole Republicans who didn't give him the same benefit of the doubt. And I said, in my part of the speech that I didn't read, his legacy is a young man. He's a relatively young man. He's in his mid-50s. He's going to be around for a while, God willing. He has a lot of good to do, and maybe some of that good can be helping to bring the country together in the face of this political catastrophe for his party. That, too, could be a part of his legacy, I said, in the spirit of being provocative.
Thank you. My name is Bob O'Brien. To what extent should Obama's relatively high approval ratings impact his legacy? Is it a function largely of his foreign policy stance, or is it more emotional in nature?
I don't know if those are the only choices. I want to answer the question. I think his high approval rating definitely figures positively in his legacy, and I tried to give voice to that, although there was so much negativity, maybe no one heard me. The man is elegant. The man is decent. The man is brilliant. The man is articulate. He's got oratorical gifts. He has conducted himself with grace. He has presided over an administration that has been relatively scandal-free. I don't know if absolutely scandal-free, but not too bad. He has conducted himself in office without exception, I think, with class. He's a class act. He's not a hard man to like. People like him. So I think the high approval ratings are partly a reflection of the fact that his personal qualities are very attractive to people. Okay? His party's still in a deep hole, but he is, his personal qualities, I think, are going to hold him in relatively good stead in the public imagination. He's a decent guy. And that can't be said for the man who's about to take his place.
Would you speak to us as an economist now?
Okay.
He inherited a deep, deep crisis. Perhaps head should have rolled that didn't roll, and yet he, from the lay perspective I have, restored the economy to relatively good health. The growth rate is low. The unemployment rate is relatively healthy now. You wouldn't ever compare him as an economist, I don't think, to his predecessor, not for a moment. So wouldn't you give his scorecard relatively high marks compared to where we were 8 years ago?
We were on the precipice of a disaster, as I understand it. It's not my field of expertise within economics. I don't know all of the details, but I talk to these people all the time. These people being macroeconomists, financial economists, monetary specialists, and people who know about securities markets and who know about financial panics and know about the link between the financial and the real sector and how that things could have gone much, much worse than they could. The worst recession since the Great Depression happens to be descriptively accurate, but not even really capturing the emotional thing. They looked down into the precipice. There was panic. People didn't know whether or not X, Y, or Z were going to go belly up and the chain of dominoes and where that would end and what that would imply. It was a global situation, not just something affecting the United States. A true house of cards teetering. So, I think this idea that if you're in office as president, when stuff happens in the economy, then you did it, is silly. So I think this kind of straight line connection is questionable. But I think, notwithstanding the fact that Geithner and Summers are Wall Street types, and Ben Bernanke and others whose names I can't mention or don't know, I think they nevertheless handled the economic management problems that they were confronting deftly and effectively. And if you want to say save the economy, I don't think that would be an exaggeration. I think that you could well say that. Yes, growth is slow, unemployment is low, but the labor force participation is also down. And so people are not feeling the same sense of economic security and whatnot that they might feel with an unemployment rate under 5%. Inflation is nowhere in sight. We got a kind of stimulus bill, but it wasn't nearly as big as it should have been. Paul Krugman was ranting on the pages of the New York Times for months and months about this. Pretty much everybody in my profession agrees that we need it with practically zero interest rates and so much work that needed to be done. Again, I'm not an expert, but my understanding is that some of the funds that were appropriated under that fairly large piece of legislation didn't actually end up promoting jobs as they might have done, but that's probably true with any such endeavor of that magnitude. Dodd-Frank is another matter, and again, this is something that people who know about know a lot more than I know about it. But it's hanging by a thread, and it's probably going to be substantially revised, and we'll see. But on the whole, I think you would have to give the president good marks for the first few years of the administration in grappling with a serious economic problem, and on the whole, managing it very effectively.
And as you suggest, mismanaging the political message of it, because it might have been interpreted as a much stronger political achievement, and it hasn't been. In fact, it's been overturned as a political achievement.
Indeed, and this is, again, I keep saying this, so no more qualifiers. I'm not an expert on this either, but I said at the end of my remarks, which I didn't read here, and I talked about Trump, and I said, you have to actually acknowledge that he did something. He came against all this opposition. He won his party's nomination, and he won the presidency. That was a pretty amazing thing that he did. And I said, he was effectively communicating with the part of the electorate that he was focused on trying to get behind him. And I said, by comparison, I thought that the president, who's a brilliant orator, stand him up in front of a microphone and ask him to speak whether he's reading it or it's impromptu, and he is going to wow you. That speech in that church after that funeral was unbelievable. It was absolutely stunning that the President of the United States was standing. He ends with breaking out into the hymn, Amazing Grace, at the end of that thing. Much of it was improvised on the fly. It was amazing. But effective political communication of the sort that allows you to cash in on your stuff, maybe he wasn't so great at that.
If you make reference to your last page one more time, you're going to have to read it. Brad, go ahead.
I think the analysis of what the Wall Street gang of Summers and Geithner brought in is accurate. I think that the piece that was missing was, not so much the saving of the banks, but the fact that they saved the bankers and the shareholders, et cetera. In other words, saving the bank as institutions is one thing.
Yeah.
Saving the individuals and not pushing
I
them.
get
There are other phenomenon that I think on the economic side that highlight the challenge. One of which we know that the only demographic in the country whose life expectancy is falling is older white folk. If you map, there's a recent study that just came out looking at the opioid crisis in the country, and the challenge is if you look where those are, the death rates are the highest. They map over a lot of these rural white communities where the opioid overdose epidemic is unbelievable. A recent study has mapped on top of, part of the declining death rate is also a function of suicide rates. They mapped suicide rates over over time and against trade developments and declining jobs in different cities, and those, not surprisingly, also overlap. So in other words, free trade, or the trade that is generally enacted in these kinds of, the Pacific Free Trade Group or NAFTA or any of them, results in, the trickle up economics, but leaves these communities devastated, and ones that have not been addressed by any economic policies that came about under Barack Obama. And I think that one of the reasons that we don't see the higher suicide rates, for instance, among the black communities, is that they're used to this decimated economy. Or in any event, the point is that the economic collapse of segments of the population that ended up, supporting this president, the president-elect, that's a huge piece of the puzzle that needs to be addressed if the Democrats, if we are ever going to regroup. Anyway, it's just the startling statistics, the actual, to see life expectancy falling in this day and age, and when you can directly tie that to policies, jobs, and economics is eye-opening. So,
Yeah, surely one of the reasons why Trump was able to prevail with these voters.
and maybe that is the hope, is that in stuffing his cabinet with billionaires essentially, that if he's not able to accomplish what Obama did not accomplish, that the change, the promise of jobs, that I fail to see how that's going to materialize under, and we'll see it, and maybe he'll be able to pull off some of those miracles, but it's reconnecting with that constituency who was originally separated from their black and colored brothers under different policies with Nixon, and politically setting up, I'm better than that separation. Anyway, I don't want to get into all of that, but Michelle Alexander's arguments about how Nixon and Haldeman and the Republican Party began separating constituencies that have natural, coinciding, totally overlapping interests. Anyway.
Well, I keep hearing Kellyanne Conway, who was the campaign manager of Trump's campaign, say in these post-election interviews that they won, and I can't remember the number, but scores of counties around the country, maybe even hundreds of counties around the country that had twice voted for Barack Obama in 2008 and 2012, but in this election cycle voted for the Republican candidate, counties throughout the country for which this is the case. I'm sure many of them will have the profile that you just described of being relatively ex-urban or rural, of being largely white, and relatively modest economic standing. So it does make it a little bit harder to say about those voters that, they just were somehow Neanderthals. I mean, they weren't Neanderthals in 2008 and 2012. They could vote for a black man for president. And it does invite us to think about what else might be going on besides their purportedly deplorable mores that might have led them to vote as they did.
There's a wonderful qualitative, well, not quite wonderful, there's an informative qualitative study that recently came out as well. Hillary had hired a polling firm to track undecideds. You may have read about this recently. Again, this just came out. And the distinguishing moment where undecideds shifted, people, and they were required to keep diaries so that there's an understanding of their thought patterns that shifted the debate. And it wasn't, as most of us thought, the email scandal. Nobody cared about the email scandal, as it turned out.
You don't have the microphone, it's okay.
No, the point that shifted this was, and this is mostly a white, lower middle class constituency, was the deplorables remark. When these individuals, they potentially former Obama supporters, are lumped into this area, and then talk about going to these rallies as in their diaries of, it was fun, we were having fun. We knew he was full of it. But to go there, it was like a high school rally, he would say. To go in and cheer and know that he wasn't going to do any of these things, but it was fun and it was uplifting, and maybe it would be different from the same old, same old. So, and then being lumped, and it's fascinating how much of this is true. It's just that having these qualitative interviews, it's, obviously I'm not obsessed with this.
Can I?
Okay, I gotta tell you this. Many people here will know my colleague Mark Blythe, the political scientist, political economist.
We've heard of it.
So I don't know, Vox.com or something, and I'm reading one of these pieces about the politics of smugness. And it's all about where that attitude, deplorables, comes from, okay? That, the elites, we elites, looking down our noses at flyover country. And I'm writing to Mark, and Mark writes back with this phrase I'll never forget. He says, I'm trying to tell these people, the Hamptons is not a defensible position. And I just think that that's a brilliant encapsulation of a certain idea. You can't defend your political position from the Hamptons. You had better get out of the Hamptons.
Well, defending it from Brown is also raises similar issues about the elites. I mean, that's where we are.
But we've got good ideas, don't we? And I want to tie some of the things that you were saying directly to your point, Professor Loury, on political messaging and actually getting some bang for your buck on some of the things that you're saying. Let me go through a couple of the things you just ticked off. Opioid addiction. Why is that a problem? In part, deregulation on pharmaceutical companies, allowing for many years basically pharmaceutical companies to run wild, doctors to prescribe things they shouldn't have been prescribing. My mother's been a nurse for 30 years. She talks to me about this all the time. Oh, we used to just give people, whatever, and tell them to go home with it. It's a different world now. Change some of those things creates a problem. That's just one of them, I just want to say. The economic side of things, you see huge poverty increases in some of these neighborhoods. Why? Because jobs are leaving. Jobs that aren't coming back, by the way, which is another part of Mark Blythe's talk, right? And so, but what are the messages on this, right? On one hand, you have Democrats who, and I agree, somebody basically needs to say these things and say, this is why these things are happening, this is what we need to do about them. One of my favorite parts that I actually thought was productive on the Democratic side during the campaign was at one of the debates, Hillary Clinton, it was the first question of the debate, they asked, why are you more qualified than your opponent to handle the economic challenges of the country? And Hillary Clinton went point by point through an economic plan which included basically retraining programs, investing in clean energy, taking areas where people know how to make energy insofar as digging coal, and keep those as energy producing areas just in a different way. Thought it was great. But here's the problem. What do Republicans do? They say, we'll get you your jobs back. It's Democrats' fault that your jobs aren't there. Ignoring the fact that it's, Republican governments have dominated some of these states. These are in Republican areas that are dominated. Which story wins out? The one that's simpler. And so again, it brings me right back to my point of what do you do to actually come up with a story that people are going to buy? Because to your point, both of your points, Hampton is not a defensible position. College Hill, a little more defensible, but still not a defensible position. But so what does the messaging actually need to be in order to do something about that?
I think one image I had recently in all of this was I think Hillary needed to lose, frankly, because the Democratic Party needed to hit rock bottom. And I think Donald Trump's election is rock bottom. And there needs to be some serious efforts at true recovery and looking at the mess that we created and contributed to on any number of different levels. So I think, anyway, that's.
So let me ask a question here. Anybody can feel free to respond. So the carrier deal, talking about messaging, okay? So as an economist, I'm thinking, oh man, you gotta be kidding me. You're gonna jawbone us back to full employment? Okay, you haven't changed anybody's cost, you haven't changed anybody's bottom line. You might be able to win this one, you might be able to win that one, but that's not a solution to the problem of the fact that an industry is not competitive in a global economy. It's just simply not a solution to that problem. Okay, so one reaction, that's what I'm trying to get to. I'm juxtaposing the kind of green eye shade analysis, which I'd ordinarily attribute to a libertarian Republican club of growth type. That, let markets do what they think. I'm juxtaposing that to Mike Pence on every Sunday show day before yesterday, running around talking about 1,000 of my constituents have going to see their Christmas hopes not dashed because of whatever. And I'm saying it's complete nonsense. Anybody, you could teach a computer to write the column that Paul Krugman is going to write about why that's nonsense. As economics, it's nonsense. But as politics, it might be, he's on the ground. You see, he's not even president yet. He's saving people's jobs. And I'm just not sure how you conduct that argument in a politically effective way. Certainly not putting on a green eye shade and saying, this is a post-truth candidate who's too stupid to know about the economy. Is not an effective rebuttal to 1,000 people getting their jobs saved on live TV.
I just wanted to say one quick thing of that.
And who are you?
Trump said on.
Could you identify yourself?
Oh, Dorothy. Anyway, I read that Trump said that he forgot that he didn't remember that he even said that about the jobs. And he when somebody said that, that they went to these rallies because they were fun and they didn't believe everything he was saying, I don't buy that. I don't buy that at all. They might have had a lot of fun and all that, but underneath of it all, they think that he's going to save them. He's going to save the world. And what's going to happen when he doesn't come through? But what's going to happen? He can't do all this stuff.
Then he won't be in power for very long if he doesn't come through and people see that for what it is. I'm not so sure. Let me just tell you. So Trump went around at pretty much every stump speech saying, we're going to fix our inner cities, our African Americans. We're going to invest. We're going to keep them safe. We're going to make the schools better. And we're going to bring jobs. He went around saying that. So I thought, hokum. Come on. Really? That's it? You're going to fix them? You just think declaring it? These are difficult problems. Fixing the schools, quote unquote, those are different. We're going to find out where these jobs going to come from, okay? But he says he's going to fix the inner cities. Now, what I was hoping for from Hillary Rodham Clinton and surrogates was he says he's going to fix their inner cities, but he's not going to do it. However, they do need fixing. He doesn't have a program. I do, okay? Instead, what they said to the African-American voters who did not show up at the polls in sufficient numbers in Philadelphia and Pittsburgh, in Detroit, in Milwaukee, and so forth, what was said to them was, he's a racist. Did you see that he called your neighborhood a hellhole? Okay? So one candidate says, I'm going to fix it and you're going to be better and you're going to be happy. And the other people retreat to this characterological dismissiveness and tell the voters who want their neighborhoods fixed, oh, he's a racist. Rather than taking them seriously enough as people in need to address effectively their needs. Okay? When I saw Michelle Obama, God bless her, God love her. She grew up in South Shore in Chicago, a stone's throw, a couple of miles from where I grew up, at a different time, I'm older than her. Say, in response, in one of the speeches when she was out there stumping for Clinton, in response to Trump says he's going to fix their inner cities, he called my neighborhood where I grew up a hellhole. I thought, reading the Chicago Tribune and counting the bodies on the streets of her neighborhood where she doesn't live anymore and will never live again, it is a hellhole, I thought. Okay, I can say that, maybe you don't want to because it feels a little bit racially offensive to say it. I don't mean it literally. Of course, it's not literally a hellhole. It's a deeply troubled place. That street that she grew up on has people with pistols shooting other people in the head on it. Your answer to that is that he's a racist?
I think we've got time for just one more question.
Well, he sort of answered the same. He sort of answered, Glenn's answered the general comment I'd make, and that's that in part, one of the issues about Trump is you've got to ask, well, what was the alternative? And I didn't vote for Trump, and I didn't vote for Hillary. I voted for Gary Johnson, who I felt was the only candidate up there who really was going to be able to do anything. So that if you get all these people who are just being told, in a rally, all these things and are excited, so what's the alternative for them? To go and have the other person, vote for the other person who they felt it might have been in a binary choice? I didn't feel it was a binary choice, but other people might have felt it was a binary choice, and so what's the alternative? And the alternative really wasn't all that attractive, I don't think.
Alex, did you see someone else? Just one quick comment or a question, thanks.
I have a question. It's not, it's kind of.
And who are you?
Oh, I'm Yuko, and I'm a sophomore undergraduate. And my question shifts from more the domestic issues, but I'm an international student, and as an international student from Japan, one of the most iconic moments of Obama's legacy was when he visited Hiroshima for the first time as a president in action. So would you how do you judge his Obama's international policies and how he portrayed America in the world?
Oh my. Okay, again, I have to claim I'm not, I'm not an expert on that either. So during the campaign, Trump went around saying nobody respects him. He's a weak leader. Putin is a stronger leader. A lot of people complain about apology tours. I thought that kind of talk was unfair to the president. It was not nuanced. Though, I thought there was going to be a red line in Syria and then there wasn't. Probably wasn't the most adept thing. I thought, haven't the Russians really eaten our lunch in Crimea, in Ukraine, in Syria? Aren't we really losing the kind of military, diplomatic, political, international tug of war with them? Again, I'm not an expert. There are people here who could perhaps know better than I do about these things. I thought getting agreement in Paris around a framework for coming to grips, it's a global commons problem of climate change. There needs to be effective means of cooperation and collaboration across national boundaries, and I think the president exerted exemplary leadership in that regard. I thought, and this is again just me, non-foreign policy expert, Libya was a total disaster. I thought more generally the management of the upheaval of the Arab Spring looked to me in retrospect to have been a little bit naive and hopeful. Morsi, the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt, Mubarak's a bad guy because he's not a Democrat? Well, he's what did Lyndon Johnson say? He may be an SOB, but he's our SOB. It seemed to me to be a pretty mixed bag.
Maybe that's the right note to end on. I've got two thank yous. One to all of you for coming out. I've seen many of you over the last 14 weeks or so. So you've been part of a good, strong dynamic that I think that we might well continue into the next season because there's still a lot to assess. So thank you all for coming. And of course, to Glenn for lending his wisdom, his patience, his intelligence, and despite the fact that he may not be an expert on everything, he's an expert on an awful lot. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Steve.